Welcome everyone to today's webinar on opportunities in the biogas and RNG in the maritime shipping market. Thanks for joining us. Looks like we've got about 120 guests from around the world that have chosen to join us today. I'm Paul Green, and I run a biogas RNG advisory business. I also run the Biogas TV brand and coordinate a new group we call BGX for Biogas 2X. So the slides are going to be at my website, greentech.com/events. And today's video recording will be stored at biogas.tv. So I'm going to introduce a new name to people, BGX. BGX is Biogas to X, X to Methane, a new conversation platform. Come join our monthly calls. You can sign up to join our group at biogas.tv/BGX. So topics today, we're going to talk about the status and structure of the International Maritime Organization's new net zero framework. We're going to talk about fuels that would feed that framework, such as bio-LNG and biomethanol. How can we overcome obstacles to meaningful implementation for the NZF? Look at the life cycle analysis of our projects getting to a negative GFI. We're going to talk about that term. You'll hear that a lot today, GFI. We really need to fight for avoided methane on our projects to get the economics to where they need to be to support serving the IMO. And finally, Jeff from Oberon is going to give us a presentation on biogas to methanol. So again, this BGX group, we're a loosely knit group of interested parties. Everybody's welcome to join. We have a monthly call on the third Thursday of the month, every month. And so this is biogas to SAF. This is biogas to bio-LNG, biomethanol, synthetic natural gas. Some key chemistries we look at are things like Fischer-Tropsch, Sabatier, gasification, pyrolysis, AD, gas upgrading. So we're just getting some conversations started so we can begin looking at some of these new markets, new opportunities for biogas. And we'll work hard with the existing biogas, bioenergy trade groups in what we're doing. So why this conversation today? So biogas business is searching for new places to send biogas and RNG, finding the place where we can get proper credit for the attributes of bio-LNG. Biogas has been challenging lately. California LCFS is rather full. We're here because the global shipping industry has almost a limitless appetite, demand for the products we make. Bio-LNG is an easy drop-in fuel for ever popular LNG boats. Ocean shipping is responsible for just an amazing quantity of greenhouse gases, over 800 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. And they use a lot of fuel, over 8 billion with a B MMBTUs per year, 8 billion MMBTUs per year to fuel ships. We may have some bumps in the road. This week has been a bumpy one. So we're seeing headlines about the administration invoking some retaliation against IMO members that back this net zero emissions plan. So how much power will the US have to influence a global rulemaking process? So some other topics swirl a bit. So these global regulations that we're talking about today, there's other parts of the world that have competing and complementary regulations to them. This isn't the first greenhouse gas program to drive to get towards net zero. So in Europe now, there's some existing rules called Fuel EU Maritime. They're trying to cut greenhouse gases by 80% by 2050. The IMO is more restrictive, but what will that mean as we have two parallel paths for the shipping industry to try to decarbonize? There's also this ETS in Europe, the emissions trading system. It's not maritime specific, but for every other industry, they're governed by cap and trade. So arguably, the shipping industry's got three carbon platforms to be watching here. So some confusion for Europe ship operators. Will some rules go away? Will some be combined? All of these are to be determined. So a key concept is well to wake in the shipping industry. So we have well to tank. So you're coming from your process into the storage tanking. That's not really ship dependent. That's in creating the fuel. In the middle is where these concepts meet, this bunkering concept, which is simply going from one tank to another, your storage tank into the boat, into that tank. And then we have this tank to wake concept where you're going through the combustion process, you're powering the ship. So when you combine well to tank and then tank to wake, you combine with a well to wake total carbon intensity concept for the life cycle emissions. So over time, ships have had a number of fuels. A while back, shipping industry burned some pretty dirty fuels, such things as heavy fuel oil. But over time, fuels are getting cleaner and cleaner. Now things like LNG are gaining in popularity. Bio LNG's got a huge share of the conversation. And in the future, e-fuels are looking like they have some intrigue to deploy into shipping, all on a path to net zero by around the 2050 timeframe. So this slide, a little busy, but it shows the popularity of LNG growing in shipping. There's about a 3x usage increase projected by 2028. You'll see all of these countries are really ramping up their consumption of LNG for bunkering. So this tally below shows a 3x usage increase by 2028. So more LNG use, more boats being made, wonderful drop-in fuel opportunity for bio LNG to simply blend to get to your target GFI for a given fuel. Bio LNG bunkering deals are happening. The fuel providers on the call today are actively filling ships with LNG. Here's Shell in Barcelona fueling a ship with bio LNG, same as in Japan, fueling with bio LNG. Press release in the past week that Anu has some bunkering going on in California for bio LNG. Finland, you'll see a bio LNG corridor in Finland. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. This is being done right now. Bio LNG, it's got really great low GHG emissions profile. And I highlight this press clipping down here just to kind of pinch myself moment here. Just here it is. LNG produced from waste-based feedstocks such as manure, food waste, and ag residues. LNG offers a low carbon option to LNG. So how often have we looked to Europe to be the leader, to go first? And here it's happening. And so it's just very exciting to see that this is really happening. Some organizations and terms to share with you. The IMO, International Maritime Organization, sponsored by the UN. MARPOL Annex 6. This is IMO's Environmental Protection Treaty. So over time, as the shipping industry has gotten more protective of the environment, more restrictions on water discharge, waste discharge. So that's governed by MARPOL and this Annex 6. MEPC 83 was a monumental event we'll talk a lot about. So the Marine Environmental Protection Committee of IMO, this 83rd meeting they had on April 25 was huge. SGMF is a group that is promoting gas as a marine fuel, Society for Gas as a Marine Fuel. C LNG is a business consortium promoting LNG as a maritime fuel. So a term here, GFI, we might think of it as CI score more commonly in what we're doing, but GHG fuel intensity, the well-to-wake GHG emissions per unit of energy used on board a ship. Another group, the Global Maritime Forum, a team dedicated to decarbonizing maritime, and the Methanol Institute, a group driving green uses of methanol. So a takeaway from today might be check out the SGMF, Society for Gases and Marine Fuel. So they're all about deployment of LNG for shipping. It's a good free resource. They've got some good resources on their website. Let's jump to this MEPC 83 concept. So this past April, it was a big deal. The IMO really set the bar at an aggressive place, and some fun adjectives here describing it was a big deal. This initiative, the details have not yet been worked out. It's a framework for now, but looking at just an enormous market size potential for the shipping industry to get to net zero by 2050. So the IMO, the MARPOL convention, you'll hear it spoken of that there's several what they call annexes within it. Annex 1 pertains to oil. Annex 2 pertains to hauling noxious liquids. Other wastes fall into the different annexes. So it's Annex 6 that the shipping industry is looking to modify. This controls, or this governs all of the pollution standards, a part of the shipping industry, Annex 6. So the net zero framework, NZF, trying to reduce carbon emissions by 30% by 2035, fully decarbonized by 2050. This is the first carbon reduction standard that covers an entire global industry. It's really quite dramatic. So when it's approved, these amendments to MARPOL Annex 6, so the member states need to approve it. So this October, what's happening is this thing called an extraordinary session, ES.2. So the amendments are due to be adopted at this extraordinary session of the MEPC. From there, in the spring, the detailed implementation guidelines will start to be approved. So what's happening is these guidelines are being updated and created now. Now is where the sausage is being made. And now is when we need to start getting bio-LNG positioned so people can give it proper GFI credit. So 2027, this will be put into force 16 months after adoption, and then 2028 is full implementation. So we mentioned MARPOL Annex 6, the sausage making here. There's a new Chapter 5 that is being written. And what happens is they're voted on. So what happened this past April at MEPC 83, 63 member organizations voted for it, 16 against, 35 abstained. So when October, in only a couple months, comes around, it needs to be accepted by 2/3 of the parties to MARPOL and represent at least 50% of the total gross tonnage. So looking back at some of the noise we're hearing from the current administration this week, how much leverage does the administration have to enter into this process and stir the pot? There's a lot of member organizations that have equal weight that will be doing this voting. And so a lot TBD, given just this late breaking news from this week. So again, adoption in October, The amendments will enter into force in March 27 and take full effect on 1/1/28. Meanwhile, the guidelines are developed in time for the full implementation. So the system, it has a two-tiered GFI reduction journey. So you'll see here, x-axis is over time, y-axis is your GFI, the greenhouse gas fuel intensity. And so we're up here at about 93 units currently, and you'll see this measured reduction over time. There's two lines here. The red line is considered the base. The yellow line is considered direct compliance. We'll get into some of the machinations here, but tier 2 is tied to the base. Tier 1 is tied to the direct compliance. So call the base kind of a worthy goal, but direct compliance is where you're really trying to get to. So you'll see some prices here, $380 per ton if you come up short getting to the tier 2 base. So if you're in 2032 and you don't reduce your GFI by 21%, let's say you only come in at 15%, you're penalized $380 per ton for how much you come up short. And then you also have to pay $100 a ton to get you fully up to the tier 1 direct. We'll have more about that in a second here. So again, two-tier system. Got to get to base, and if you don't, it's that $380 a ton you get dinged for. But direct is where you stop getting fined. So if you don't get to base, you can either pay 380 ton emissions or purchase surplus units. So it's a credit trading scheme. How does it work? So if you fail with your GFI to get to tier 2, you have to cover tier 2 and tier 1 compliance deficits. And this graphic coming up will help illustrate that a bit. So any ship that is here not meeting the tier 2 compliance, you have to pay the $380 to get to the base target, and then you've got to pay the $100 to get to the tier 1 direct compliance target. So this would be for the scenario of your GFI doesn't meet the base. If your GFI is in between the base and the direct, you're paying the 380, and then you're paying some nominal amount for your other tier 1 credits. If you're killing it and you're into the surplus zone here, you've got some extra credits that basically you can bank into the system. So much like the LCFS that we're very familiar with here in the US. So these prices will change over time. This is what's baked into the standards now. $380 to get you to the tier 2, $100 to get you from tier 2 up to tier 1, and then these will get adjusted again at 2031. So got to pick up some time here a little bit. Some thoughts on our LNG. So if we're going to be making bio-LNG, these will be the places that will be sending them. You can look at this map at your leisure at clng.org, but different colors are associated with being able to fill up with green LNG, LNG. There's some liquefaction plants here, some regasification plants, but this is where we'll be fueling the ships. A resource I'd encourage everybody to download and check out is this Biogas as a source for biofuels for shipping by the Maersk McKinney Moeller Center. some findings here is they really try to review the economics of what we're doing here, because we got to get the economics to make sense. They're arguing full cost to make bio-LNG is in the 1100 to 18 USD per ton range. That cooks down to a raw cost of $20 to $33 per MMBTU, not including profits. So that's construction costs, operating costs, feedstock costs, and transportation costs. So just quickly comparing some fuels, you'll see on this well to wake emission spectrum here that liquefied biomethane comes in much lower if you're comparing it to, say, LNG. So LNG at 600 units, bio-LNG in this case is 200 units, much lower GFI. So we'll need to figure out how to move molecules from a project site to be liquefied. TBD whether some of this is mass balance, book and claim, or if we're going to make e-methanol out of this. Just real quick on making methanol, some ways we make it through AD, pyrolyze or gasify the CH4, you make your CO and H2, reforming with special catalysts under pressure and temperature to make your e-methane. Synthetic natural gas, starting with CO2 feedstock, is on the table, converting CO2 to CH4 through a variety of thermal and biological techniques, but we need a source of cost-effective renewable H2 to get there. So that's what I've got. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'm going to hand off to my buddy Alex McFarland, and he's going to bring some critical information here as a follow-on. So, Alex, the floor is yours.
All right. So, audio, visual, good?
Good.
Right.
Yep. All set.
So, so today I'm going to be talking about how biomethane can meet this net zero carbon initiative for maritime fuels, and what is needed, one of the core elements to make it happen. And I think about it in terms of a bounty, and I'm going to explain that meaning. I'm Alex McFarland, independent consultant, RNG Connect. I have over 20 years in the biogas business, from mostly in the project development realm, but a bit of R&D, operations experience, and a fair amount of work in these transactions around RNG. So, and that's kind of the area that I'm working now to advise sellers. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the opportunity and urgency associated with fugitive emissions, why that's important, what I mean by that, life cycle assessment, how this all boils down to essentially getting one number right. And we have an example in Canada of how that was done. And then the need for really strong accreditation, but something that can be deployed quickly and easily. And I think there is an opportunity for action. The LCA process within IMO, they have a separate group that's looking at this. We have a number of consultative status organizations that Paul mentioned. So I'd like to see us try to provide them with data and calculation methodologies, help them out to come to the right conclusion. And the reason why is that a negative emission biomethane, offers the opportunity to produce zero or net zero biofuels at a lower cost per ton than other sources. and we can do it while cleaning up the world. And 1 unit of biomethane from organic waste or manure, if you credit it properly, it can yield 2 or even much more units of net zero liquefied biomethane or biomethanol. And on the economic side, at today's price for biomethanol or bio LNG, a 1-to-2 ratio that I explained here would add about $40 per million BTU of value. And I'd be happy to discuss that further. So there's a very large demand. I mean, we mentioned this, 7.5 quads. That's the number that Paul was talking about. 800 million tons of CO2 reduction compared to 2023. That's the entire emissions from, for example, Saudi Arabia or Canada. And waste sources are clearly preferable versus food and feed competitive options as a source of biofuel. So we'd like to use wastes if we can. At the same time, we have to look at what is actually happening in the world out there with waste, and and there's a connection between what's happening out there and the opportunity in front of us. So, of the observed warming of the climate that we've seen so far, almost half of it is methane. It can be attributed to the forcing effect of methane. And so it's very important for us to get this under control. It kind of leveled off for a while, and now methane is creeping back up. So it's on us to address it. At the same time, basically within lower income countries, the predominant method of dealing with waste is open dumping. And developed and emerging economies are really struggling with what to do with their waste, and you see some landfills here. You have got the picture of the methane plume leaking out of the landfill, Buenos Aires, Lahore, Mumbai, Delhi. This is a global problem, and it has to be addressed by diverting the material away from the landfill. And our best-in-class landfills here are not immune to this problem. You see, this is some of the image from Charlotte and Altamont, and so a landfill fundamentally cannot solve this problem. It's very important that we capture the gas that's produced in a landfill and put it to good use while we can. But it should not be seen as a long-term solution globally. Looking at agriculture, and livestock in particular, we have the enteric fermentation. We have nitrous oxide emissions that are involved with manure management and agricultural residues. So the majority of that methane is not available to us because we can only look at the manure, but it's still very important for us to address and go get. So this quote here really brings it home for me, is that solid waste management has been overlooked despite its potential for rapid impact on reducing carbon emissions and its ability to give more room in the global carbon budget to hard-to-abate sectors. That's exactly what we're talking about. So if we look at the agriculture and waste sector, this is the global budget. Something like 220 million metric tons a year. And we just zoom in on that. It's possible for us to divert the feedstocks at the root cause of a lot of that methane. Again, our industry can't grab with the cow burps, but the manure and the organic waste we can grab. We can make biogas from that. This is proven technology. We can upgrade it to RNG. That RNG can be transported again to a liquefaction unit or a biomethanol refinery, right? We can make these fuels today. We are making these fuels today, as Paul mentioned. And those can then fuel net zero emission maritime. And we don't need new technologies, really. What we need is the right structure. We need the right incentives. We need the right policy. And we have this quote here. And by the way, digesting organics is the most effective way of dealing with these ag and solid waste residues, as compared to a composting or the other options that are out there. So it absolutely has a place in dealing with the problem. And then in terms of the energy potential, this graphic maps out the agricultural residues, the manure, and the bio waste. That's the catch-all term for the organic fraction of municipal waste. And then you add it up to like 31 or almost 32 quads of energy value versus what we're going to need in net zero maritime. And I've even included some conversion losses here. So let's say, call it 10. So there's about 3x the available energy value. And there's about 3x the energy value, right? So what's missing? What do we need to go get that? Well, now it gets into the LCA formula. So the way that IMO and these other and the Fuel EU, they're looking at what is my total emissions of producing some biofuel. And you've got plenty of things on the positive side, your transportation, your collection, any of your on-site losses, etc. And then they have a term for CCS, carbon capture and storage, CCR, recovery. And then they have one term, which is soil carbon accumulation. And so this is seen as, so literally, if you are running a process that produces a biochar or something like that, and you can put it in the soil, you can demonstrate it, you would get that credit. But it's seen as a potential placeholder value where negative emissions associated with fuel pathways can be captured. So it's important that they get this right. But the inertia, in my opinion, it's not on our side, because all of the major climate policies and so on, the European, the red programs don't recognize bio waste. They do for manure, which is great, and that's a good building block for us. But I believe that there's going to be a fair amount of influence of just assuming that bio waste doesn't have a negative emissions. And here's some of the reasons against it, right? So biofuels can't have negative carbon emissions. That's one of the problems. But is biomethane from a waste product as opposed to a biomass still a biofuel in that definition? We can wordsmith it. Are we talking semantics here? Waste and residues considered to have zero life cycle emissions at the process of collection, which is a good thing for the agricultural residues. This is the definition: treetops, straw, etc. This is agricultural residue, clearly not a definition that covers bio-waste. And then there's an assumption that there's a policy of phasing out landfilling of organic waste. That's what happens in Europe. And so that assumption is that would then extend to other districts and other regions. And so therefore, we can't credit avoided emissions if they're going to be dealt with anyway through regulation. And that's true in the context of additionality, but there is a very significant exception to that. Only Europe has done this over the last 20 years as a large region. Only Europe has actually reduced its fugitive methane emissions. So I think a lot of the policy making, we're likely to have this merge between Fuel EU and IMO, and so the inertia is against us. Is my point here. But the rest of the world does not have this problem under control, and I could argue Europe hasn't finished either. So this is why we need a bounty. We need an incentive to go and grab these feedstocks that generate this methane. Honorable mention, by the way, to Japan, who essentially leaks almost nothing. So Canada did this right, and this is a very encouraging example for us. They were headed down this path of using the strictest regulation as the baseline because, well, Nova Scotia, they compost everything. They have a law, so that we should all just compost and be like Nova Scotia. But that's not the reality. And so stakeholders, that's us, encourage, and in the case of Canada, it's provincial waste management entities and the biomethane industry and ECCC themselves went and did the work. What is the actual reality with respect to organics diversion, landfill methane capture in Canada? What are the real numbers? 77% of the food waste and 32% of yard and garden is in the landfill. And 64% of the resulting landfill methane escapes, not including oxidation factor, so of 10%. So basically, that's the reality, and those are the numbers that end up getting used if you are diverting food waste or yard and garden. So you can end up with a CI if you're in Canada and you're producing a digester, you're eating food waste in yard and garden, you can end up producing a CI with the -150, -200 score, and that's real. So they expanded the system boundary to consider emissions upstream of collection. Now, semantics are important with this. So I could argue that it's not really emissions upstream of collection, but rather it's a negative or avoided emission that is a consequence of collection. So we have to, as we move forward with this, some important things to keep in mind. We have to avoid double counting. So emissions credits can only be sold once, and they can't be counted in any other scheme. They're not voluntary emissions. They wouldn't count towards host nation NDCs. And so we have to maintain that principle, but acknowledge that there's going to be some share and allocation of these avoided emissions, and that's going to be an important discussion. Nations are already working, stakeholders are already working to try to sort this out. In my opinion, the polluter pays principle should apply, and if a host nation has committed significant resources to diverting or to building out its waste infrastructure or putting an incentive on renewable gas or something like that, they should get a chunk of the avoided emissions. But this is a minutia, this is a detail that will be sorted out, but regardless, we can't have double counting for these emissions. Now, how do we comply with additionality? This is the big stumbling block, right? What we have to remember is that UNFCCC's Clean Development Mechanism has already told us that if there's a regulatory requirement and it's not enforced and there's no compliance, we don't consider that as an alternative scenario. So folks can make a policy that says no waste in the landfill, and then what actually happens? What's the result? Maybe that doesn't count for anything. And then I think we should create a mechanism that would decrease the baseline avoided emissions as the situation improves, right? It isn't fair to say that we get some avoided emissions credit forever, because in fact, what we're trying to do is solve methane and a CO2 problem. And so we need to acknowledge that things change, and we should track, and we can easily do that looking at how much methane is leaking into the, I mean, we can see it from satellite, right? And we know it in the data. Europe has decreased its emissions from methane by half over 30 years. So it's possible for us to know exactly what's happening out there and adjust accordingly. Then we should be rigorous biomethane leakage stewards as an industry. It goes to the bottom dollar because the CI score is ultimately how these things get measured. But if we're really going to tackle the problem, we need to keep we have all the tools to keep our biomethane loss below 1% into the pipeline, and then from distribution, from compression, transmission, liquefaction, or methanol refining, to boil off gas. We just have to be basically, in my mind, I think of like the Dana Carvey anal chef. This is the mindset that we should have about fugitive emissions, and it's to our own benefit and that of the world. So it's a massive potential demand sink, a global price on carbon with teeth on it, pending October. We can meet the demand, the entire demand, on an energy basis with even with much larger carbon reductions. And so IMO has an opportunity to recognize this and take steps to reduce this enormous damage caused by non-CO2 GHG in waste and ag. And I won't say that it all boils down to getting the right value for that term, but there could be a river of projects, funding, development activity, that emerges from this. But without getting this right, there's no river. I don't believe. So we have IMO consultative status organizations that hopefully are attending today, representatives from them anyway, SGMF, Methanol Institute, and CLNG. And they have the ability to provide data and backup to the LCA process as it takes place. So it's a pretty unique opportunity and a unique time. And I, by the way, I'm doing this work pro bono simply because of that actual point. This is a very unique time and opportunity to be engaged. So stay in touch, and we'll stay in touch with you. And here's my contact information, and I'll turn it back over to Paul, and thank you.
Great. Thanks, Alex. A couple questions. So what have we seen so far from the IMO about the LCA? So question came in on what's the view on non-food crop based cellulosic biomass like corn, wheat straw, cover crops. What have we seen from IMO so far? I know you and I were sharing that one spreadsheet. There was a bit of a model there kicked around. Can you comment on what that looks like?
Yeah, I don't think we've seen, and someone may feel free to correct me, but I don't think we've actually seen any sample calculations using ag residue from IMO itself. But I would expect that ag residue would have a slight positive emissions profile. We have on this next, I can just share my screen here again. And again, from the fine folks at Maersk McKinney Moller Center, we got a couple of pathways here with a manure, and so this is a standard liquefied biomethane, and then they show the implications of a negative one. But these are not official calculations. I would expect a positive 20, 30 from ag residue.
Okay. And I've invited Maersk McKinney to join our next BGX call. So again, the BGX group, we meet the third Thursday of the month. So that's coming up on the 21st. So a week from today, we'll see if they're able to join or not. But for those that have asked to participate in the BGX, you go to biogas.tv/BGX, and that'll get you in the mix. So with that, Alex, I thank you very much. There's a lot of wood to chop here to get to the promised land for sure, but thank you for your thought leadership. So next up, Jeffrey Wright is with Oberon, and they've been showing us some real market leadership in the space of biogas to new energy, new fuels, new molecules. So it'd be good to get an update from Oberon to hear about all the good things you're working on and some of these facilities that you're looking to build. So Jeff, I'll give you the floor here.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. And thanks to Alex as well for the great work that you guys have done. Just pulling up the presentation here. So give me a second. There we go. Okay. So yeah, thanks again, Paul and Alex, for that really great insight into these opportunities. So I'm Jeffrey Wright, VP of Project and Commercial Development at Oberon Fuels. Really kind of will build on that foundation of what Alex and Paul were talking about, right? Really looking at some kind of real world applications on the project development and the commercialization side that we're working on. So quickly about Oberon, we've been around for about 15 years, based in San Diego. And we primarily develop renewable fuels from organic sources, right? So we'll talk a bit about what that looks like. We have been developing renewable dimethyl ether at our facility in Brawley for about 4 years. And that dimethyl ether, or DME, is currently being blended with propane to decarbonize that industry. And it's been to market for 4 years from our partners at Suburban Propane. We'll talk briefly about two projects we're developing now. Both are in the Gulf Coast region. One is an RNG project, and another is a renewable methanol and DME project, both of which start from really kind of the same foundation. So, before when we start looking at these projects, to determine, what are we going to build? We're fortunate to have kind of this multi-molecule approach where we can look at an opportunity, and we can really develop the project and what the output's going to be based upon kind of what we say is really the highest margin product. And that's really going to be a function of the location of the project, the carbon intensity of the biogas that's produced which is the foundation of the fuels that we're building. What's the volume, what's the scale of these projects, and then really what's kind of going on in the market that we would look to get to bring these fuels into market. So, we all understand the RNG market. There's lots of new opportunities, as Paul and Alex have talked about, in diverting away from kind of the standard, market outlet that we're all kind of, near and dear to our house, whether it's, getting into California, whether it's getting into non-California transportation, or whether it's going into the voluntary markets from the projects we've all been developing. From there, we can go from natural gas into methanol. From methanol, we can go into the dimethyl ether, which has several different use cases, whether it's blending with propane, whether it's a diesel replacement, et cetera, or whether we can bring that DME one step further into renewable hydrogen. So, DME is very hydrogen rich. It liquefies and transports at ambient temperatures very easily by repurposing kind of the LPG infrastructure globally. It's a great way to transport those hydrogen molecules and then reform them on or near site into hydrogen via a reformer that we're working on. So, really thinking about, how do we do this? It really starts with an anaerobic digester, right? We're basically taking raw biogas. We are then doing a bit of a cleanup. So depending upon the size, we can either take it right to RNG via the means that we're all familiar with, or we can take that raw biogas, and we can do a bit of cleanup to it, including the CO2, and then we can bring that into a renewable methanol state. So with a few different stages of going through a steam methane reformation process, we can get it into a methanol synthesis loop. Then we're getting a mostly purified version of methanol. From there, we can get it to a purified version into renewable methanol, into some of these use cases that, that Paul and Alex were talking about, in the maritime world and others, or we can take it into our single stage catalytic distillation process to make dimethyl ether. We're working on 2 projects now, as Paul mentioned. Both are in the Gulf region. Both are from large volumes of poultry manure from a industry leader, where one of the projects isn't quite big enough to get us the scale to the liquid fuels, and we're going into RNG. That project is quite interesting in that we're not bringing that to California. We are not going down that road at the moment with getting a new LCFS pathway. We've been working with an offtake partner where that RNG is going to be mass balanced for the production of methanol, for the maritime industry, not in going to Europe. So not being constrained by the current issues now around the union database issue about whether mass balance or versus book and claim RNG can get into those markets under the current framework. Talk about that in a second. So this is still getting RNG to methanol under an ISCC framework, but not going to the US. Excuse me, not going to the EU market. The larger project that we're working on, Project Titania, is really going directly to renewable methanol. So we're getting that scale from that biogas to be able to produce renewable methanol. That renewable methanol, I'd say 85% of that is going to go into the methanol, into the methanol world. We'll talk about a bit about kind of what that looks like, and about 15 to 25% of that will be finished to go into the dimethyl ether market in the United States into a few different use cases. Let's talk about some of the opportunities that we're seeing, and some of the challenges that we're seeing in getting some of these molecules to market. So, from a regulatory perspective, there's this union database issue that has been, hamstrung, the RNG industry in trying to get RNG or RNG derived molecules into the EU market. So, the issue is, the question is, whether this is protectionism masked in regulatory policy, is not for us to really kind of determine, but it's really been about traceability, right? So the EU market trying to determine, is the US RNG market have the right traceability framework to determine that, number one, it is biogenic in nature, and number two, there's no double counting going on. It is expected that that's going to be resolved, quote unquote, soon. This year is what people are still kind of focused on. I've let kind of the market participants, who are on the call, frame, their view as to whether or not that's going to be resolved this year and what the end result is going to be. But it has slowed down RNG derived products from getting to the EU, whether it's an RNG, LNG, methanol, or other molecules. From a methanol perspective into the maritime, the biggest challenge has been, there's been this race to the bottom, effectively, that the shipping industry has been trying to get developers to match, biogenic methanol being produced in China, and those prices are about $600 to $700 a ton. I mean, there are no developers in the US or the EU that can come anywhere near that, including us. And so, we've had challenges in being able to contract directly with the maritime industry because we just can't get to those prices. Now, the good news is that cracks are starting to show in getting to those prices, and it's really been driven by these same traceability issues in China, where sources of biomethanol are being questioned to the extent that some of these shippers have actually postponed delivery of ships that were earmarked to take in Chinese biomethanol because of these traceability issues. So that has not yet, from what we've seen, resulted in in prices coming up. But that seems to be kind of the inevitable conclusion. So the other big challenge that we're seeing is there's this huge mismatch between how the maritime industry purchases methanol now, or other fuels versus what, us developers need, right? We want 10, 15-year offtake contracts. They're used to buying short-term, spot out to a year at the most. So, there has to be this closing of this delta before there's really going to be kind of a groundswell of RNG or biogas to methanol production happening. There have been some deals done. There have been some long-term deals done by some of the largest shippers. I believe they've been done by e-methanol sources as opposed to biomethanol sources. So that is great news for the industry. But until that delta is really going to be closed, it's going to be a challenge in being able to get some of these biomethanol fuels to market. That said, like I said, the cracks are starting to show. What we're seeing is, as I mentioned, is that methanol from book and claim, from book and claim methods, are being contracted to mass balance methanol into the EU market. We have the RNG project are developing. We've already sold that gas to a methanol developer who's going to get that to a non-EU ISCC market. And what we're seeing is that the ISCC methodology and framework is becoming a global standard for a few different fuels. So whether it's going to the EU market and you're challenged by the current UDB issue, that is being kind of obviated by getting methanol via non-EU markets. So it's early days in that, but it's really showing hope that we can develop negative CI RNG, negative CI biogas, and we can get that to various markets. And Oberon, we kind of play kind of in the middle of that, right? So, in one case, we're developing our negative CI RNG under an ISCC framework that uses this baseline manure method to get these negative CI fuels, into non-EU markets at the time. But we, shamelessly, we can participate in that as well. So when you think about the slide that I showed earlier, we can start at the manure side of a project, right? We can develop a project on our own as we're doing. We create that biogas, and then we can go in a few different directions from there. Or we can co-locate with a developer where a developer can say, you stop at the biogas side. You are not upgrading. You're not connecting to a pipeline. You are not getting that upgrading technology. We take that raw biogas from you on or at your site, and then we work our magic to get those fuels into market, whether it's going to be dimethyl ether or methanol, dimethyl ether, or DME, into hydrogen. And then we can get that into current markets, which is LPG blending in North America, which continues to expand beyond the transportation market as we're looking at home heating. It's really about decarbonizing that LPG industry, whether it's locally, or internationally, but also into the diesel industry, right? So when you think about, the earlier versions of Oberon, we were looking at DME as a full diesel replacement, and that hasn't gone away. It's just slowed as the biodiesel industry is really kind of where that market went to. So, but what's being looked at now in the maritime industry is, so there's multiple fuels, right? There's LNG from renewable sources. There's methanol. They're looking at ammonia, which some cases in some markets will work and some doesn't. But diesel is already being used, and so whether biodiesel can be used in the maritime industry is being evaluated. as well as DME blending with traditional diesel to lower that carbon intensity. So it's really kind of come down to what some of these frameworks are, under IMO, and other frameworks, what they're going to be, what their policy is going to be around blending. Because in the end, if you're looking to get down to, a certain, fuel CI level, as we stepped out over time that Paul showed, it's really going to be about blending, and whether, blending with low CI based, biogas can get you to, a mass balanced, methanol, or to some kind of a mass balanced biodiesel. That's where the opportunities land. So, fortunately, we kind of play in the middle of a lot of these different fuels, depending upon these opportunities, and we see, opportunities opening up. It's moving slowly, but again, we've done some deals. And some other deals are being done, and we see great opportunity in happening right now, in the development world for these fuels. And I will leave it with that. Thank you, and back to Paul.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. One question for you. So what is the scale of a biogas production that makes biomethanol cost effective?
So for us, for us to do DME, we're usually looking to get to about 450,000 decatherms a year. Gives us that scale that we need to get into the U.S. transportation market. Those metrics are changing as we're looking to get into home heating, because we can blend at much lower percentages. As from a methanol perspective, to give you a sense what we're doing on this project, this poultry project, we are digesting about 375,000 tons a year of manure and other poultry related organics. That is getting us, I think, about 4 to 500 or 5 to 600,000 decatherms.
Okay.
What we're doing is, what's interesting is, because of our process, when we take that biogas and we go through an SMR, the hydrogen carbon ratio that comes out of that it's not wide enough. So we either purge CO2 or we increase hydrogen. So we're actually buying RNG to augment that biogas supply to get us up to the ratio that we need. So in some cases, we are augmenting biogas we produce on site with book and claim RNG, with specific attributes that we need. So in some cases, we're going to also be a buyer of RNG to augment. But for the methanol side, we're needing about 500,000 decks.
Okay, great. So we're at time. I'm putting the website address where you can get the slides today. It'll be Monday before you can get access to the video. So don't worry, you will have an email with links to both the slides and the video. So I just want to thank my friends, my speakers, Alex and Jeff, for your time. We covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time there, and a lot of opportunity, a lot of uncertainty, though, we still need to kind of sort out. So thank you, all the guests that joined, all 120 of you that stuck around for the whole hour. That's a record turnout for one of my events. Next month, we have a webinar on dealing with nitrogen from digestates on September 16th. Stay tuned for that. But with that, we're going to call this one a wrap. We'll let everybody roll. Thanks, everyone.